Welcome to Story Hour, a virtual meetup hosted by Wolf and Heron.
So my identity's always been kind of something hard for me to pin down. I was born in Kuwait to two Polish parents, but I've lived in the US for most of my life. They emigrated here when I was 2 years old. So I learned both Polish traditions and American traditions at the same time. On top of that, I grew up mostly in the Northeast, near Steffi. But I've lived in the South since 2009. So I have that go-getter New Yorker mentality. I lived in the city as well. And then I also have this more laid-back side to my personality that I've really, tried to bring on since I've lived in the South. On top of that, I'm a twin, and I'm the only person in my family who didn't pursue architecture at one time. And that's including my husband, who's an architect right now. So as you can see, there's like a lot of different parts to my identity. And on top of that, I've always kind of felt caught between Polish and American. I'm not fully Polish, I'm not fully American, because I kind of learned both of those things at the same time. But today I'm going to tell you the story of how I added some Polish traditions to my American wedding. So as a first generation Polish American, I wanted to bring together both sides of me at my wedding. I spent months planning, as most people do, especially women. But I wanted to make it special for everyone. And there was this added stress because since my parents, so another thing I should mention is my family now lives in Poland, including my sister, who was my maid of honor. And they've lived there for almost the last 10 years. So like I grew up in the US, but also had this weird dichotomy that now my family's back in Poland. But anyway, because of the distance, our families had never met before, and they were going to meet at a rehearsal dinner the night before our wedding. And on top of that, Steffi, on top of that, they come from pretty different backgrounds. My family is super liberal and lived all over the world. My husband's family, let's say, is pretty conservative. He grew up in rural North Carolina. And to add even more stress, my dad has a very thick Polish accent, and his dad is hard of hearing. So as you can imagine, I was stressing about what might happen at this rehearsal dinner. But what I tried to do as best as I could is just focus on the little details that I could add to make our wedding special, these Polish touches. And so there were a few different traditions I tried to add to our wedding. And I did this also, not just for me, but also to try to include my family somehow, because they were also never going to come to they were just coming for the wedding, basically a week before the wedding. So I didn't get the bachelorette party from my sister or any of those. Like I got my dress with a friend, instead of having my family there. So regardless, so I asked my dad to bring these Polish chocolates. They're called Mieszko. The company that makes him also is my dad's first name. And he always likes to remind me that it's the name of the first king of Poland as well. So I came downstairs one night. Also, my parents were staying with us and my sister, so even some more stress right before the wedding. But I came downstairs and the entire table was covered in these chocolates. There must have been 200 or 300 chocolates, and it was a wedding favor that we gave out. And I just felt so touched that they would go out of their way to bring all of this with them in their suitcase from Poland. And then my mom started unpacking her suitcase, and it was filled with all these little Polish trinkets, gifts for my husband's family, which I never even asked her to bring. It was just something she wanted to do. And I'm wearing something like similar, that basically they were covered like little kitchen trinkets, pot holders, and coasters, and they were hand painted in this small Polish village. And then at the wedding, my mom introduced this Polish welcome tradition with this fancy decorated bread that I made so that we never go hungry, salt for the difficult times that you work through in your wedding, and vodka so you never go thirsty and enjoy life. And then finally, I made this floral crown, which is part of this błogosławieństwo ceremony, which is like a symbolic goodbye to the bride. And I updated mine a little bit. I made it out of eucalyptus and roses instead of the traditional wildflowers. So all of that being said, I did all the preparation, but what I wasn't prepared for is what my international friends would do at my wedding. So I was getting up to get dinner from the buffet, and I hear my Russian and Polish friends start yelling, "Goshko, goshko, goshko." And I know that word means bitter, like now, but in the moment I was like, okay, what do I do? And so I looked at my parents' table next to us, and I go like, what? Help? Like, what do I do? And they didn't really see me. So I look over at my husband and I say, just drink, just drink. That's what we must do. We're Polish, we just drink. And that didn't shut up my friends. They kept saying, goshko, goshko, goshko. And I hear my dad yell, you have to kiss each other. And so I kissed my husband. We finally got it. Everybody applauds. And in the moment, I felt kind of dumb, honestly. Like, I didn't know that simple Polish tradition. But at the same time, who cares? Like, all my friends are here. They're all supporting us. They all love us. And I just, it was only the second Polish wedding I've ever been to in my life. So how am I supposed to know? So I just, let it go, enjoy the rest of the evening, dance the night away. And so that's the story of how I added a little bit of Polish tradition to my American wedding, and how I also learned a new Polish tradition at my own wedding, thanks to my friends.
Yay! All right, lovely. Well, that was a lovely story. Thank you. What did Agatha do really well? What should she hold on to with her story in the future? Go ahead, Molly.
Well, one of my favorite parts that I picked up on was how you were able to kind of infiltrate some of your family members' personalities into the story, like especially your dad's. Like I felt like I really was able to like visualize your dad, and even with like the chocolates and how he was like would always remind me that the first king of Poland was named this, whatever. But I just felt like I just kind of felt like I knew him, so that was really nice.
Yeah, he has a strong personality, so I'm not surprised.
What else was good?
I really loved the sense that I got of something that I think is true of humanity and identity in general, which is that it changes, right? Like there can be something like you being Polish was like a really big part of who you are, and yet you still learned something new about it at your wedding, right? Like I think that's such a beautiful thing, that like our identities, as strong and as fixed as they can seem, sometimes they're not, right? Because we're still human amid that experience. And I love that the illustration of that was like so clear and perfect.
Thank you.
What else? Any other thoughts?
I also really liked sort of your calm demeanor while you told the story. Like your voice was very soothing, and you didn't seem nervous, and you just sort of, it kind of felt like you were just telling us a story as an old friend, and I really liked that too.
That's good. I didn't feel
That was
way.
going to be my comment, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I practiced it, so that might be why, but yeah.
Practice helps.
Yeah.
Practice does help. But there was something very, I don't know if the word is nostalgia, but there was something about your delivery that was very, calming and simultaneously like soft. I don't really know what the right word is, but
I'll take that.
Yeah.
It's funny because I don't necessarily feel that when I'm doing it, because I mean, there's still nerves. I'm just trying to like,
no need for nerves.
Yeah, it's funny because you were talking about something that could have potentially been incredibly stressful, right? Like a wedding can be incredibly stressful. And yet I felt like this sense of almost being comforted by the story, which is I think an incredibly difficult thing to put together, right? Like to talk about something stressful and also calm people down in the process.
Wow. No, it was
really
super stressful. Like right before, I left a lot of shit out. I was telling Steffi what happened. Like my dad got stung by wasps 2 days before walking me down the aisle. There were a lot of things. They painted our house while I was working, I left a lot of the super stressful things out. So, yeah.
What about opportunities for experimentation, things that Agatha could play with to make the story more powerful?
I think a lot of times when I'm telling a story that's really personal or something that I feel is really important, I like really have a tough time not giving like all the exposition or like a chronological timeline. And I think like even just like what you were just saying, like, oh my gosh, I skipped so much. Even just like diving into some of those stories a bit more and like elongating it to be the story could be an interesting way to go about it. So like I'm trying to think of in the example, like in your story, like just, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but taking like one sliver of like the whole chronological piece and just diving into that part could be an interesting exploration of like trying to show instead of tell like what happened.
Yeah, I wanted to actually do that with the Goshko part, like elongate that and then get rid of some of the other like details. But I was like wrestling with, are they not going to know enough context, or am I, because I've done these like, I guess you could call them like meditations, but like visualizations where you go into like super detail. But then I was like, but is that exciting enough? Like, cause I was thinking about like, oh, I could talk about the light streaming in through the window and how my friends are like sitting at the table. And yeah, anyway, next time I could do something like that instead.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that, when we talk about one of the superpowers we have is pick one theme. And one of the things that becomes easier to do if you go really narrow with your story is to do that pick one theme thing really well. Okay. And I think, like, if I think about your story, the context that you set at the beginning, there was some about your Polish American sort of dual identity. And there's also stuff about stress, right? Like you use the word stress like a bunch of times in your ramp up. And yet your story isn't really about the stress, right? And so like it's your story is about, learning something new about your Polish American identity, or like the complexity of that experience, right? And so when you're talking about a story that's about being Polish and American and being neither at the same time and both at the same time, that's what you should focus on. And all the other things, even though it's totally, completely part of your experience, the stress stuff, it's actually not part of your theme. The fact that your family was not there even necessarily, and like the all of the like, oh my God, my family and his family, they've never met before. Very interesting, not related to your point. And so like you can play with that. And I think what that does illustrate is that your story has the potential for many, 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 many themes that you can play with. And so you can leverage this one experience of your wedding to talk about how you handle stress, to talk about how you handle, like how you plan a wedding when your family's not nearby. You can talk about how, your Polish American identity was challenged. You can talk about, like, there's so many themes that you have that you could play with. And so you can actually work this story 10 different ways and then just have them all in your back pocket.
Yeah, I thought about the stress one, but I didn't want to overstress the people listening because, it was hard. Even though, like, I also thought with my identity, like, I used to be kind of an event planner as part of my job. So I have that skill. It's just there's also this major layer of perfectionism that goes along with it that I was trying to manage on my own,
I bet. What else? What else could Agatha play with or experiment with?
So something that I think might be fun to play with is you use another language. Like you spoke Polish a few times, and I feel like that, depending on your audience, of course, that might not be a novelty for some audiences, right? But I know I've hardly ever heard that spoken. And so every time you did, I was like, wait, what? Like, I missed that, like, right? And I feel like there's room to play with like accentuating that or highlighting that a little bit more, especially if that part of your identity is what you're gonna make your theme, right? So I think that would be really cool to experiment with, and how you use that language throughout your story.
Yeah, that's true. I could see that having a lot of potential, especially if your story is about the American-Polish duality, right? Like, bring more Polish in, right?
I had a question. So was the tense weird? Because like a lot of it was like in the past, and then I kind of towards the end I made it kind of present, but also talking about, I don't know, like it felt like weird to me that I was changing, but I didn't know if you wanted a story in like more, I mean, I guess it is in the past anyway.
We have no rules.
But so you guys didn't notice that I was
didn't jar me.
Cool.
I think it might have been jarring had it been written. Right? I think we would have noticed it if it was in writing, but we change tense all the time when we talk, and I think that blew right past all of us.
I didn't do it too much, but I was like, do I say this like as if it already happened and how I felt looking back, or was I, I kind of did.
It's a worthwhile experiment.
Yeah.
Try it both ways, and see how your audience responds. So that actually brings me to another thought, which is in your another couple of, the other three superpowers: keep it real, invite curiosity, and engage emotion. All three of those might actually kick up a notch if you tell it in the present tense. It might be just an interesting experiment to try, because by telling it in the present tense, you might actually psychologically, physiologically be more present to the experience, and therefore help your audience also be more present to the experience.
I'd have to cut out like all this stuff about the traditions probably, because like, how do you, unless, I don't think that would work, but it would be just that last part of the story. Unless I say I'm wearing this floral crown that's part of rigidity,
I think the other thing that you can do, so this is a piece of experimentation that I offer to a lot of storytellers. In particular, our engage emotion superpower is not where most people go first when they are storytellers, and yet it is probably the most powerful of the four, if you can really do it well. And a tip that I often offer is whenever you are using a feeling word, I was confused, I was stressed, I was anxious, I was whatever, whenever you use a feeling word, strike it out and replace it with a physiological experience. So instead of I was stressed, you say I could feel the heat rising in my chest, or like in the back of my neck. Or I had like, instead of like I was confused, you can say I looked left and right. Like you can use your body as a way to explain or to like show rather than tell us what the emotions are. And it is through that you add more visual and physiological context to your story, but simultaneously allow your audience to feel it more viscerally.
Like
so you can play with that. It's definitely not a first place that we go. And yet if you like take the moment to kind of think about what would that be physiologically, it makes a huge difference in how colorful your story is and how vibrant it can become. Visit wolfandheron.com to find out more about our story hours.